Billionaire hires a nanny for his sick son, but cameras reveal a secret that could destroy his family. Arthur Montenegro, a ruthless billionaire known for his cold business tactics, is desperate. His 6-year-old son, Leo, suffers from a rare illness and needs constant care. After countless interviews, he finally finds the perfect nanny, Clara, a kind and caring young woman who quickly wins the boy's heart. But Arthur trusts no one. He installs hidden cameras throughout the mansion to monitor Clara's every move. At first, everything seems normal, until one night he sees something shocking. Clara is singing Leo a lullaby, the same one Arthur's late wife used to sing. But there's no way Clara could have known that. From that moment on, he starts digging into Clara's past and uncovers a truth that shakes him to his core. She has a secret connection to his family that could put everything at risk. Is she a threat? Or the only person who can save his son and reveal a long-buried truth? Arthur Montenegro stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of his penthouse office, his gaze fixed on the sprawling cityscape below. The setting sun painted the sky in hues of orange and pink, but he saw none of its beauty. His mind was consumed by a single thought: his son, Leo. At just 6 years old, Leo had already endured more than most adults. A rare genetic disorder ravaged his small body, leaving him weak and in constant need of care. Arthur's wife, Elena, had been Leo's primary caregiver, but her sudden death in a car accident 6 months ago had left both father and son adrift in a sea of grief and uncertainty. Arthur ran a hand through his salt and pepper hair, feeling the weight of his responsibilities pressing down on him. He was a titan of industry, feared and respected in equal measure. His ruthless business tactics had earned him billions, but none of that mattered now. For all his wealth and power, he couldn't cure his son's illness or bring back the woman he loved. A soft knock at the door pulled him from his brooding thoughts. "Mr. Montenegro?" His assistant, Sarah, poked her head into the office. "The next candidate for the nanny position is here." Arthur nodded, his jaw set in grim determination. This would be the 14th interview in as many days. So far, none of the applicants had met his exacting standards. They were either too inexperienced, too timid, or simply lacked the warmth and compassion Leo so desperately needed. "Send her in," he said, moving to sit behind his massive mahogany desk. The woman who entered was not what Arthur had expected. She was young, probably in her mid-20s, with warm brown eyes and a gentle smile. Her curly hair was pulled back into a neat bun, and she wore a simple but elegant blouse and skirt. "Mr. Montenegro," she said, extending her hand. "I'm Clara Reeves. It's a pleasure to meet you." Arthur shook her hand, noting her firm grip. "Please have a seat, Ms. Reeves." As Clara settled into the chair across from him, Arthur studied her carefully. There was something about her that put him at ease, despite his natural inclination to distrust everyone. "Tell me, Ms. Reeves," he began, "why do you want this position?" Clara's eyes lit up with genuine enthusiasm. "I've always had a passion for working with children, especially those with special needs. When I heard about your son's condition, I knew I had to apply. I believe every child deserves the chance to live their best life, regardless of their circumstances." Arthur leaned back in his chair, intrigued. "And what makes you qualified to care for a child with such complex medical needs?" Clara didn't hesitate. "I have a degree in pediatric nursing and have worked with children with various genetic disorders. I'm certified in CPR and first aid, and I've completed additional training in caring for children with rare conditions. But more than that, I believe in treating each child as an individual, not just a set of symptoms to be managed." As the interview progressed, Arthur found himself increasingly impressed by Clara's knowledge, compassion, and quiet confidence. She spoke of her previous experiences with a mix of professionalism and genuine warmth that was rare in his world of cold business dealings. "There's one more thing you should know," Arthur said, his voice growing serious. "Leo's condition requires round-the-clock care. You would be living in the mansion with only occasional days off. It's a demanding job that leaves little room for a personal life. Are you prepared for that level of commitment?" Clara met his gaze unflinchingly. Mr. Montenegro, I understand the gravity of the situation. Your son's well-being would be my top priority. I'm ready to dedicate myself fully to his care. Arthur nodded slowly, a glimmer of hope sparking in his chest for the first time in months. Very well, Ms. Reeves. I'd like you to meet Leo. If he responds well to you, the job is yours. Clara's face lit up with a genuine smile. I'd be honored to meet him. As they rode the elevator down to the private wing of the building where Leo's medical suite was located, Arthur found himself studying Clara surreptitiously. There was something familiar about her, though he couldn't quite place it. Perhaps it was simply her kind demeanor reminding him of Elena. The doors opened, and they stepped into a brightly lit hallway. Arthur led Clara to a room filled with medical equipment, but also decorated with colorful murals and toys. In the center of it all, propped up in a hospital-style bed, was Leo. The boy's face was pale and drawn, dark circles under his eyes speaking to his constant pain and fatigue. But when he saw his father, a weak smile spread across his face. "Daddy," Leo said softly, his voice barely above a whisper. Arthur's stern facade cracked for a moment as he moved to his son's bedside, gently ruffling the boy's dark hair. "Hey, champ, how are you feeling today?" Leo shrugged, his small shoulders rising and falling with effort. "Okay, I guess." Arthur turned to Clara, who had hung back respectfully. "Leo, I'd like you to meet someone. This is Ms. Reeves. She might be coming to help take care of you." Clara stepped forward, her smile warm and genuine. "Hello, Leo. It's very nice to meet you." Leo regarded her with curious eyes. "Do you like Legos?" he asked, gesturing to a half-built structure on the table beside his bed. Clara's face lit up. "I love Legos. May I see what you're building?" As Clara engaged Leo in conversation about his Lego creation, Arthur watched in amazement. His son, usually withdrawn and wary of strangers, was opening up to Clara with surprising ease. She asked him questions about his favorite colors and animals, laughing at his jokes and offering gentle encouragement when he struggled to express himself. After about 20 minutes, Arthur could see that Leo was tiring. Clara seemed to sense it too, smoothly wrapping up their conversation. "It's been wonderful talking with you, Leo," she said. "I hope we can build something together soon." Leo nodded, a small but genuine smile on his face. "I'd like that," he said softly. As they left the room, Arthur felt a mix of emotions swirling in his chest. Relief that they had finally found someone Leo responded to, hope that Clara might be able to bring some joy into his son's life, and a nagging sense of unease that he couldn't quite place. Back in his office, Arthur turned to Clara. "Ms. Reeves, I believe we've found our nanny. When can you start?" Clara's eyes widened in surprise and delight. "Really? Oh, Mr. Montenegro, thank you. I can start immediately if you'd like." Arthur nodded, his businesslike demeanor returning. "Excellent. My assistant will draw up the contract and go over the details with you. I expect you to move in by the end of the week." As Clara left the office, her excitement palpable, Arthur turned back to the window. The city lights now twinkled in the darkness, mirroring the small spark of hope that had ignited in his heart. For the first time in months, he allowed himself to believe that things might get better for Leo. But as he stared out at the night sky, a chill ran down his spine. In his world, nothing came without a price, and he couldn't shake the feeling that hiring Clara Reeves might come with consequences he wasn't prepared for. The Montenegro mansion stood like a fortress on the outskirts of the city, its imposing stone facade a testament to Arthur's wealth and power. As Clara's taxi pulled up to the wrought iron gates, she couldn't help but feel a mix of excitement and trepidation. This would be her home for the foreseeable future, a gilded cage where she would dedicate herself to caring for young Leo. The gates swung open silently, and the taxi wound its way up the long, tree-lined driveway. Clara's heart raced as the mansion came into full view. It was even more magnificent up close, a sprawling estate that seemed to blend modern luxury with old-world charm. As the taxi came to a stop, Clara saw Arthur Montenegro waiting on the front steps. His tall frame was silhouetted against the warm light spilling from the open door, his expression unreadable. "Ms. Reeves," he said as she approached, his voice cool and professional. "Welcome to your new home." Clara smiled, trying to hide her nervousness. "Thank you, Mr. Montenegro. I'm eager to get started." Arthur nodded curtly and led her inside. The foyer was a study in opulence, with a crystal chandelier hanging from the vaulted ceiling and priceless artwork adorning the walls. But Clara's attention was drawn to the photos scattered among the decor, snapshots of a happier time, featuring Arthur, Leo, and a beautiful woman with kind eyes, who could only be Elena Montenegro. "Your room is on the second floor near Leo's. Suite," Arthur explained as they climbed the grand staircase. "You'll find everything you need there. Leo's medical equipment and supplies are in the room adjacent to his bedroom. Dr. Patel, his primary physician, will be here tomorrow morning to brief you on Leo's current treatment plan." Clara listened attentively, making mental notes. As they reached the landing, she heard a soft whimper coming from down the hall. Arthur's stern expression softened almost imperceptibly. "It seems Leo is awake," he said. "Perhaps you'd like to say goodnight to him before settling in?" Clara nodded eagerly. "Of course, I'd love to." They made their way to Leo's room, a spacious area filled with medical equipment but also touches of childhood. Colorful murals on the walls, shelves lined with books and toys. Leo lay in a specially designed bed, his small form dwarfed by the machinery surrounding him. "Hey, champ," Arthur said softly, approaching the bed. "Look who's here." Leo's eyes, heavy with fatigue, brightened when he saw Clara. "Ms. Reeves," he said, his voice weak but excited. Clara moved to his bedside, smiling warmly. "Hello, Leo. I hope you don't mind me stopping by to say goodnight." The boy shook his head. "Will you read me a story?" he asked hopefully. Clara glanced at Arthur, who gave a small nod of approval. "Of course," she said, settling into the chair beside the bed. "What would you like to hear?" Leo pointed to a well-worn book on his nightstand. "That one. It's about a boy who can fly." As Clara began to read, her voice soft and animated, Arthur watched from the doorway. He couldn't help but notice how natural Clara seemed with Leo, how she effortlessly engaged him in the story, asking questions and encouraging his imagination. It was a stark contrast to the clinical interactions Leo usually had with his nurses and doctors. By the time Clara finished the story, Leo's eyes were drooping. She tucked the blanket around him gently, whispering a soft goodnight. As she turned to leave, Leo's small voice stopped her. "Ms. Reeves," he said sleepily, "I'm glad you're here." Clara felt her heart swell with emotion. "I'm glad I'm here too, Leo. Sweet dreams." As they left the room, Arthur's face was inscrutable. "You have a way with him," he said, his tone neutral. "That's good." Clara nodded, unsure how to respond to his guarded demeanor. "He's a wonderful boy, Mr. Montenegro. I'm honored to care for him." Arthur led her to her room, a spacious suite with a sitting area and a private bathroom. "Get some rest, Ms. Reeves. Your work begins in earnest tomorrow." As the door closed behind him, Clara let out a breath she didn't realize she'd been holding. She looked around the luxurious room, feeling both out of place and strangely at home. This was her chance to make a difference, to bring some light into Leo's life. But as she unpacked her meager belongings, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was stepping into a world far more complex than she had imagined. The next few weeks passed in a whirlwind of activity as Clara settled into her new role. She quickly established a routine with Leo, balancing his medical needs with activities designed to stimulate his mind and bring joy to his days. They built elaborate Lego structures, read countless stories, and even started a small garden on his balcony, planting flowers and herbs that Leo could tend to from his wheelchair. Arthur, for his part, remained a distant figure. He would check in on Leo daily, his love for his son evident in the softening of his eyes, but he rarely stayed long. Clara often caught him watching their interactions from doorways or through windows, his expression unreadable. One evening, As Clara was helping Leo with his physical therapy exercises, Arthur appeared in the doorway. His presence seemed to fill the room, and Clara felt a familiar tension settle over her shoulders. "How is he doing?" Arthur asked, his voice gruff. Clara smiled encouragingly at Leo as he completed another set of arm movements. "He's making progress, Mr. Montenegro. His strength is improving and his spirits are high." Arthur nodded, his eyes fixed on his son. "Leo, how do you feel about Ms. Reeves? Is she taking good care of you?" Leo's face lit up. "She's the best. Dad, we have so much fun together. Did you see the garden we started?" A flicker of something, pain, regret, passed over Arthur's face. That's good, son. I'm glad you're happy." As Arthur turned to leave, Clara called out to him. "Mr. Montenegro, if you have a moment, I'd love to show you the progress Leo's made with his art therapy." Arthur hesitated, then nodded curtly. Clara helped Leo into his wheelchair and guided him to a small table covered in colorful drawings. Leo eagerly showed his father his creations, explaining the stories behind each one with animated gestures. For a brief moment, Clara saw Arthur's stern facade crack. He knelt beside Leo's wheelchair, genuinely engaged in his son's explanations. The love between them was palpable, but so was the awkwardness, as if neither quite knew how to bridge the gap that illness and grief had created. As Leo's excitement waned and fatigue set in, Clara gently suggested it was time for him to rest. Arthur stood, his walls slamming back into place. "Thank you, Ms. Reeves," he said stiffly, "for everything you're doing for Leo." Clara nodded, feeling a mix of sympathy and frustration towards this complex man. "It's my pleasure, Mr. Montenegro. Leo is an extraordinary child." That night, after tucking Leo into bed, Clara found herself wandering the quiet halls of the mansion. The opulence surrounded her, but she couldn't shake the feeling of emptiness that permeated the space. Family photos lined the walls, capturing moments of joy that seemed a lifetime away. As she turned a corner, she nearly collided with Arthur. He seemed startled to see her, his usual composure slipping for a moment. "Ms. Reeves," he said, recovering quickly, "is everything all right with Leo?" Clara nodded. "Yes, he's sleeping peacefully. I was just exploring a bit. I hope that's all right." Arthur's eyes narrowed slightly, but he nodded. "Of course. This is your home now, after all." An awkward silence fell between them. Clara, feeling bold, decided to break it. "Mr. Montenegro, may I speak frankly?" He raised an eyebrow but gestured for her to continue. "I can see how much you love Leo," she said gently, "but I also see how difficult it is for you to connect with him. Have you considered spending more time with him outside of his medical routines?" Arthur's jaw tightened. "Ms. Reeves, I appreciate your dedication to my son, but my relationship with him is not your concern." Clara took a deep breath, steeling herself. "With all due respect, sir, it is my concern. Leo's emotional well-being is just as important as his physical health. He needs his father's presence, not just his provision." For a moment, Clara thought she'd gone too far. Arthur's eyes flashed with anger, and she braced herself for a blistering rebuke. But then, to her surprise, his shoulders sagged slightly. "You sound like Elena," he said softly, almost to himself. Then, louder, "I don't know how to be what he needs. I can't bear to see him suffer." Clara's heart ached for both father and son. "Mr. Montenegro, Leo doesn't need you to have all the answers. He just needs you to be there to share in his joys and sorrows. Start small, read him a bedtime story, or join us for an art session. I promise you, it will mean the world to him." Arthur was silent for a long moment, his internal struggle evident on his face. Finally, he gave a small nod. I'll consider it. Good night, Ms. Reeves." As he walked away, Clara leaned against the wall, her heart pounding. She had taken a huge risk in confronting her employer so directly. But as she thought of Leo's face lighting up at the mere mention of his father, she knew it had been necessary. Little did she know, Her words had set in motion a chain of events that would soon shake the very foundations of the Montenegro household. As the weeks turned into months, Clara's presence began to work subtle changes in the Montenegro mansion. Leo's health showed signs of improvement, his spirits lifted by the constant care and attention he received. Even Arthur, true to his word, made tentative efforts to spend more time with his son outside of medical discussions. One evening, as Clara was preparing Leo for bed, she heard a soft knock at the door. To her surprise, it was Arthur, looking uncharacteristically hesitant. "I thought perhaps I could read Leo his bedtime story tonight," he said, his voice gruff but uncertain. Clara beamed at him. "Of course, Mr. Montenegro. I'm sure Leo would love that." As Arthur settled into the chair beside Leo's bed, Clara quietly excused herself, giving father and son some privacy. She lingered in the hallway for a moment, her heart swelling as she heard Arthur's deep voice stumbling through the first few lines of The Velveteen Rabbit. Later that night, unable to sleep, Clara found herself drawn to the mansion's vast library. The room was a bibliophile's dream, with floor-to-ceiling shelves filled with leather-bound tomes and first editions. As she ran her fingers along the spines of the books, she noticed a small alcove hidden behind a heavy curtain. Curiosity piqued, Clara pulled back the fabric to reveal a cozy reading nook. A plush armchair sat beneath a small window, and on a side table rested a framed photograph. Clara's breath caught in her throat as she recognized the woman in the picture. Elena Montenegro, her arms wrapped around a much younger Leo, both of them laughing at something out of frame. "What are you doing in here?" Clara whirled around, to find Arthur standing in the doorway, his face a mask of barely contained fury. She realized with a start that she had unknowingly stumbled into a private sanctuary. "Mr. Montenegro, I'm so sorry," she stammered. "I couldn't sleep and I was just exploring the library. I didn't mean to intrude." Arthur strode forward, snatching the photograph from her hands. "This area is off limits," he growled. "You had no right to be here." Clara's heart raced, but she stood her ground. "I apologize for the intrusion, but I meant no harm. Your wife, she was beautiful." Leo has her smile. Arthur's anger seemed to deflate, replaced by a bone-deep weariness. "Yes," he said softly. "He does." A tense silence fell between them. Clara, sensing an opportunity to bridge the gap, took a deep breath. "Mr. Montenegro, may I ask, what was she like? Leo speaks of her often, but I know so little about her." For a moment she thought Arthur would order her out of the room, but then to her surprise he sank into the armchair, his eyes fixed on the photograph. "Elena was everything," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Brilliant, compassionate, stubborn as hell. She saw the good in everyone, even me." He let out a bitter laugh. "She was the heart of this family. When we learned of Leo's condition, she was our rock. She never lost hope, never stopped fighting for him." Clara listened intently, seeing a side of Arthur she'd never glimpsed before. "She sounds like an amazing woman." Arthur nodded, lost in memories. "She was, and then in an instant she was gone. A drunk driver. It was so senseless. And I was left alone with a sick child I had no idea how to care for." "But you're learning," Clara said gently. "Leo adores you. He treasures every moment you spend with him." Arthur's eyes met hers, filled with a vulnerability she'd never seen before. "I'm not good at this, Ms. Reeves. I don't know how to be the father he needs." "You're trying," Clara insisted. "That's what matters. Leo doesn't need perfection. He just needs you." Arthur was quiet for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "Thank you, Ms. Reeves, for everything you've done for Leo, and for your patience with me." As Clara left the library that night, her mind was reeling. She had seen a glimpse of the man behind the billionaire's facade, a grieving husband and father struggling to hold his family together. Her heart ached for him, for Leo, for the family they could have been. But as she climbed the stairs to her room, a nagging thought tugged at the edges of her mind. There was something about Elena's photograph, something maddeningly familiar that she couldn't quite place. She pushed the thought aside, chalking it up to her overwrought emotions. Little did she know, that fleeting moment of recognition would soon unravel a web of secrets that had been carefully hidden for years. The next morning, Clara woke to the sound of raised voices coming from Arthur's study. Concerned, she made her way down the hall, pausing outside the partially open door. "Oh, can't keep this up forever, Arthur," a man's voice she didn't recognize was saying. "The board is getting restless. They want answers about the Pantheon project." "The project is none of their concern," Arthur snapped. "I've told you, James, it's a personal matter." "A personal matter that's costing the company millions," the other man, James, retorted. "Look, I know this is tied to Leo's condition somehow, but enough!" Arthur's voice was like steel. "The Pantheon project stays off the books and out of the board's hands. That's final." Clara barely had time to step back before the door swung open. A tall man with salt and pepper hair stormed out, nearly colliding with her. "Excuse me," he muttered, giving her a curious look before heading down the stairs. Arthur appeared in the doorway, his face thunderous. When he saw Clara, his expression shifted to one of suspicion. "Ms. Reeves, how long have you been standing there?" Clara swallowed hard. I just arrived, Mr. Montenegro. I heard raised voices and was concerned." Arthur's eyes narrowed, clearly not believing her. "What did you hear?" "Nothing specific," Clara lied, her heart racing. "Just that there seems to be some disagreement about a project." Arthur studied her for a long moment, then seemed to come to a decision. "Ms. Reeves, I value your discretion as much as your care for Leo. I trust that anything you may have overheard will remain confidential." It wasn't a question, but a command. Clara nodded quickly. "Of course, Mr. Montenegro. My only concern is Leo's well-being." Arthur's posture relaxed slightly. "Good. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have work to attend to." As he disappeared back into his study, Clara let out a shaky breath. What was the Pantheon project? And how was it connected to Leo's illness? She had stumbled onto something far bigger than she had imagined, and she couldn't shake the feeling that it was somehow tied to the nagging familiarity she'd felt when looking at Elena's photograph. As she made her way to Leo's room to start their morning routine, Clara's mind was racing. She had come to the Montenegro mansion to care for a sick child, but now found herself in the middle of a mystery that seemed to touch on every aspect of this fractured family's life. For Leo's sake, and for reasons she couldn't quite articulate, Clara knew she had to uncover the truth. But as she helped the sleepy boy out of bed, she was acutely aware of the risks. Arthur Montenegro was a powerful man, and she was just a nanny who had already overstepped her bounds once. As Leo chattered excitedly about the day ahead, Clara made a silent vow. She would protect this child, not just from his illness but from whatever secrets threatened to tear his family apart, no matter the cost. The following days were a delicate dance for Clara. She maintained her focus on Leo's care, pouring her energy into his therapy sessions and educational activities. But beneath the surface, her mind was constantly churning, piecing together the fragments of information she'd gathered. One afternoon, as Leo napped after a particularly strenuous physical therapy session, Clara found herself drawn back to the library. She knew she was taking a risk, but the need for answers outweighed her caution. This time she bypassed the hidden alcove and instead focused on the bookshelves themselves. Her eyes scanned the titles, looking for anything that might shed light on the mysterious Pantheon project. Most of the books were classics or historical texts, but one section caught her attention. A collection of medical journals and genetics textbooks were grouped together, some of them looking well-worn. As Clara pulled one of the books from the shelf, a folded piece of paper fluttered to the floor. Her heart racing, she unfolded it, to find a series of handwritten notes in what she recognized as Elena's handwriting from the photo inscriptions. The notes were a jumble of medical terminology and what looked like genetic sequences. One phrase was circled multiple times: CRISPR potential for targeted gene therapy. At the bottom of the page, in different handwriting, Arthur's, she realized, was scrawled, "Pantheon, key to Leo's cure." Clara's mind reeled. Was the Pantheon project some kind of experimental treatment for Leo's condition? And if so, why all the secrecy? Before she could ponder further, she heard footsteps approaching. Quickly, she snapped a photo of the notes with her phone and replaced the paper and book exactly as she'd found them. She had just stepped away from the shelf when Arthur entered the library. His eyes narrowed suspiciously. "Ms. Reeves, what are you doing in here?" Clara forced a calm smile. "I was just looking for a book to read to Leo when he wakes up. He's been asking for more adventure stories lately." Arthur seemed to relax slightly, but there was still an edge to his voice. "I see. Well, feel free to borrow whatever you'd like. For Leo. But please remember that my private office and certain areas of the library are off limits." Clara nodded, grabbing a random adventure novel from a nearby shelf. "Of course, Mr. Montenegro. I apologize if I've overstepped." As she left the library, she could feel Arthur's eyes boring into her back. She knew she was walking a dangerous line, but the stakes were too high to back down now. Over the next few weeks, Clara carefully observed the comings and goings at the mansion. She noticed an increase in visits from men and women in lab coats, always ushered quickly into Arthur's study. On several occasions, she overheard snippets of conversations about breakthroughs and human trials. All the while, she continued to pour her heart into caring for Leo. The boy was thriving under her attention, his health showing small but steady improvements. Clara found herself growing more attached to him with each passing day, her determination to uncover the truth fueled by her love for this brave, resilient child. One evening, as Clara was helping Leo with his homework, Arthur appeared in the doorway. His face was haggard, dark circles under his eyes betraying his exhaustion. "Leo," he said softly, "how would you feel about trying a new treatment?" Leo's eyes widened. "Will it make me better, Dad?" Arthur moved to sit on the edge of Leo's bed, taking his son's small hand in his own. "We hope so, champ. It's something your mom was working on before she died. We think we might finally be ready to try it." Clara's breath caught in her throat. This had to be related to the Pantheon project. She watched as Leo's face lit up with hope, and her heart ached. What if this experimental treatment was dangerous? But how could she deny Leo a chance at a better life? "Mr. Montenegro," she said carefully, "may I ask what this treatment entails? As Leo's caregiver, I'll need to be prepared for any potential side effects or special care he might need." Arthur's eyes met hers, and for a moment she saw a flicker of something. Gratitude? Respect? Before his usual guarded expression returned. "Of course, Ms. Reeves. I'll have Dr. Patel brief you fully before we begin. For now, just know that it's a highly targeted gene therapy designed specifically for Leo's condition." As Arthur explained the basics of the treatment to an excited Leo, Clara's mind was racing. Gene therapy using CRISPR technology was cutting edge, and not without risks. Was this what Elena had been working on before her death? And why all the secrecy if it was a legitimate medical treatment? Later that night, after Leo had fallen asleep, Clara found herself once again wandering the halls of the mansion. She was lost in thought, trying to piece together the puzzle when she heard voices coming from Arthur's study. Normally, she would have kept walking, but something in the tone made her pause. "Can't keep this quiet much longer, Arthur." "Oh," woman's voice was saying. "The FDA is starting to ask questions about our research." "We're so close, Sarah," Arthur replied, his voice strained. "Just a few more weeks and we'll have proof of concept. Once we show them Leo's improvement, they'll have to approve the trials." "And if something goes wrong?" the woman, Sarah, asked. "Arthur, I know how much this means to you, but we're talking about experimenting on children. Your son. We don't have a choice." Arthur's voice cracked with emotion. "This is Leo's only chance. It's what Elena would have wanted." Clara backed away from the door, her heart pounding. The pieces were starting to fall into place, but the picture they formed was more complex and dangerous than she had imagined. As she made her way back to her room, Clara's mind was a whirlwind of conflicting emotions. She understood Arthur's desperation to save his son, but at what cost? And what role had Elena played in all of this? Clara knew she was in over her head. She had come to the Montenegro mansion to care for a sick child, and now found herself embroiled in a web of medical ethics, corporate secrets, and a father's desperate gamble to save his son. As she lay in bed that night, unable to sleep, Clara made a decision. She couldn't stand idly by while Leo was potentially put at risk. But she also couldn't betray the trust that had been placed in her. She needed more information, and there was only one place she could think to find it. With trembling hands, Clara reached for her phone and pulled up the photo she had taken of Elena's notes. There, in the corner of the page, was a name and number she hadn't noticed before. Dr. Evelyn Chen, geneticist. Taking a deep breath, Clara dialed the number. As it began to ring, she silently prayed she was doing the right thing. For Leo's sake, and for the sake of her own conscience, she had to know the truth behind the Pantheon project. Little did she know that phone call would set in motion a chain of events that would change everything. For the Montenegros, for herself, and for the future of medical science itself. The phone rang 3 times before a sleepy voice answered. Hello? Clara's heart raced as she realized the gravity of what she was about to do. Dr. Chen? I'm sorry for calling so late. My name is Clara Reeves, and I'm calling about Elena Montenegro's research. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. When Dr. Chen spoke again, her voice was sharp with alertness. How did you get this number? Who are you really? Clara took a deep breath. I'm Leo Montenegro's nanny. I've stumbled onto something involving Elena's work in a project called Pantheon. I think Leo might be in danger and I need your help. Another pause, then a heavy sigh. Meet me tomorrow at the Bluebird Cafe on 5th Street, 10 a.m. Come alone, and don't tell anyone about this call. The line went dead before Clara could respond. She sat on her bed, phone clutched to her chest, wondering if she had just made a terrible mistake or taken the first step towards uncovering the truth. The next morning, Clara told Arthur she needed to run some errands for Leo's upcoming birthday. It wasn't entirely a lie. She did intend to pick up some supplies, but the guilt of her deception weighed heavily on her. The Bluebird Cafe was a small, unassuming place tucked between a bookstore and a vintage clothing shop. Clara arrived early, her nerves on edge as she sipped a cup of coffee and watched the door. At precisely 10 a.m., a woman in her late 50s, with salt and pepper hair pulled into a tight bun, entered the cafe. Her sharp eyes scanned the room before landing on Clara. Without a word, she slid into the booth across from her. Dr. Chen? Clara asked tentatively. The woman nodded curtly. And you must be Ms. Reeves. Start talking. What exactly do you know about Pantheon? Clara quickly recounted everything she had discovered. The overheard conversations, Elena's notes, the planned treatment for Leo. As she spoke, Dr. Chen's expression grew increasingly grave. I was afraid of this, she muttered when Clara finished. Arthur's gone too far. What do you mean? Clara leaned forward, her voice urgent. What exactly is the Pantheon project, and how is it connected to Leo's condition? Dr. Chen sighed, heavily, her eyes darting around the cafe as if checking for eavesdroppers. The Pantheon project was Elena's brainchild. She was brilliant, you know, a geneticist far ahead of her time. When Leo was diagnosed with his condition, she threw herself into researching a cure. Clara nodded, encouraging her to continue. Elena discovered a potential method for targeted gene therapy using a modified CRISPR technique. It was revolutionary, but also incredibly risky. The potential for off-target effects was high, and the long-term consequences were unknown. Dr. Chen's voice dropped to a whisper. She wanted more time for testing, for refining the process. But then, the accident, Clara finished softly. Dr. Chen nodded. After Elena died, Arthur became obsessed with completing her work. He poured millions into the research, brought in top scientists, all off the books to avoid regulatory scrutiny. I tried to reason with him, to explain that we weren't ready for human trials, but he wouldn't listen. Clara felt a chill run down her spine. And now he wants to use this experimental treatment on Leo? It appears so, Dr. Chen confirmed grimly. Ms. Reeves, you have to understand the gravity of the situation. This treatment could potentially cure Leo's condition, but it could also have catastrophic side effects. We simply don't know enough about the long-term implications. Clara's mind was reeling. But why all the secrecy? If this could help other children with similar conditions? Dr. Chen's expression hardened. Because what Arthur is proposing is highly unethical and likely illegal. Rushing an untested gene therapy to human trials, especially on a child, could result in criminal charges, not to mention the potential fallout for his company if this became public. A heavy silence fell between them. Clara's thoughts turned to Leo, his bright smile and indomitable spirit. She thought of Arthur, a father driven to desperation by grief and the desire to save his son. The weight of the situation pressed down on her. What can I do? Clara asked finally, her voice barely above a whisper. Dr. Chen studied her for a long moment. You're in a unique position, Ms. Reeves. You have access to the Montenegro household and Leo's daily care. Keep your eyes and ears open. Document everything you can about Leo's condition and any treatments he receives. If Arthur does move forward with this, we may need evidence. Clara nodded, feeling the enormity of the responsibility settling on her shoulders. And if I see signs that Leo is in immediate danger, then you call me immediately, Dr. Chen said firmly, sliding a business card across the table. Day or night, I still have contacts in the Medical Ethics Board and the FDA. If it comes to it, we can blow the whistle on the whole operation. As they parted ways, Clara felt a mix of relief and trepidation. She had answers now, but they only led to more questions and impossible choices. How could she protect Leo while still respecting Arthur's desperation to save his son? And what would happen if the truth about the Pantheon project came to light? Walking back to her car, Clara's mind was so preoccupied that she almost didn't notice the black SUV parked across the street, or the man inside watching her intently through tinted windows. By the time she registered the potential threat, the vehicle was already pulling away, melting into the flow of traffic. Heart pounding, Clara hurried to her car. As she drove back to the Montenegro mansion, she couldn't shake the feeling that she had just stepped onto a path from which there was no turning back. The stakes were higher than she could have imagined, and she was now a key player in a drama that stretched far beyond the walls of the luxurious home where she worked. Back at the mansion, Clara found Leo in high spirits. Arthur had spent the morning with him, reading stories and even attempting to build a Lego structure together. The sight of their bonding warmed Clara's heart, but it also deepened her inner conflict. How could she potentially destroy this fragile happiness in the name of medical ethics? As she helped Leo with his afternoon exercises, Clara's mind raced through possible scenarios. Should she confront Arthur directly, gather more evidence, or simply wait and watch, ready to intervene if Leo showed any signs of distress? Her contemplation was interrupted by the arrival of Dr. Patel, Leo's primary physician. The doctor's usual warm demeanor seemed strained, and Clara caught him exchanging a meaningful glance with Arthur. Ms. Reeves, Arthur said, his voice carefully neutral. Dr. Patel would like to discuss some updates to Leo's treatment plan with us. Perhaps we could speak in my study. Clara nodded, her heart rate quickening. As she followed Arthur and Dr. Patel down the hallway, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was walking into the lion's den. Whatever was about to be revealed, she knew it would force her to make a choice that could change everything. The heavy oak door of Arthur's study closed behind them with a soft click, sealing them into a world of secrets and impossible decisions. Clara took a deep breath, steeling herself for whatever was to come. For Leo's sake, and for the sake of her own conscience, she had to be ready to face the truth, no matter how difficult it might be. Continuar. Chapter 6. The Precipice of Choice. The tension in Arthur's study was palpable as Clara settled into one of the plush leather chairs. Dr. Patel stood near the window, his usual jovial demeanor replaced by a look of grim determination. Arthur, for his part, paced behind his massive mahogany desk, his fingers drumming an anxious rhythm on its polished surface. "Ms. Reeves," Arthur began, his voice carefully controlled, "what we're about to discuss is of the utmost confidentiality. I trust you understand the gravity of the situation?" Clara nodded, her mouth suddenly dry. "Of course, Mr. Montenegro. My only concern is Leo's well-being." Arthur's eyes searched her face as if trying to gauge her sincerity. After a moment, he seemed satisfied and turned to Dr. Patel with a nod. The doctor cleared his throat. "As you know, we've been exploring new treatment options for Leo's condition. We believe we've developed a revolutionary gene therapy that could potentially cure him." Clara's heart raced. This was it, the Pantheon Project in action. She forced herself to maintain a neutral expression as Dr. Patel continued. "The treatment involves using a modified CRISPR technique to target the specific genetic mutation causing Leo's illness. In theory, it could repair the damaged DNA and allow his body to function normally." "In theory?" Clara couldn't help but interject. "Has this been tested?" A flicker of unease passed over Dr. Patel's face. "We've had extremely promising results in animal trials, but I won't lie to you. This would be the first human application." Arthur stepped forward, his eyes blazing with a mixture of hope and desperation. "Ms. Reeves, I know how this sounds, but you have to understand this is Leo's best chance, maybe his only chance." Clara's mind whirled. She thought of her conversation with Dr. Chen, the warnings about the risks and ethical implications. But she also thought of Leo, of his bright smile and the way he fought every day against a body that betrayed him. "What are the risks?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Dr. Patel sighed. "As with any experimental treatment, there are unknowns. The therapy could fail to have any effect. There's also a small risk of off-target genetic modifications, which could lead to unforeseen complications." "Complications?" Clara pressed. "Potentially serious ones," Dr. Patel admitted. "In the worst-case scenario, it could accelerate the progression of his condition or cause new health issues." The room fell silent as the weight of this information settled over them. Clara's gaze shifted to Arthur, who had stopped pacing and now stood with his hands gripping the back of his chair, knuckles white with tension. "Mr. Montenegro," she said softly, "may I ask, why me? Why are you including me in this discussion?" Arthur's expression softened almost imperceptibly. "Because you've become more than just Leo's caregiver, Ms. Reeves. He trusts you. He loves you. And if we proceed with this treatment, we'll need your help to monitor him closely, to be our eyes and ears when the medical team can't be here." Clara felt a lump form in her throat. The trust being placed in her was overwhelming, but it also filled her with a sense of dread. She was being asked to be complicit in something that walked a razor's edge between miraculous cure and potential disaster. "When would this treatment begin?" she asked, buying time to collect her thoughts. "We're prepared to start as early as next week," Dr. Patel replied. "We've set up a specialized treatment room here in the mansion to minimize Leo's exposure to outside contaminants." Clara's eyebrows shot up. "Here? Not in a hospital?" Arthur's jaw tightened. "We need to maintain absolute privacy, Ms. Reeves. If word of this got out before we could prove its efficacy..." He didn't need to finish the sentence. Clara understood the implications, the legal risks, the potential damage to Montenegro Industries, the vultures that would descend if they caught wind of such a controversial treatment. I need some time to process this," Clara said, her voice shaky. "This is a lot to take in." Arthur nodded, his expression a mix of understanding and barely concealed impatience. "Of course. Take the rest of the day to think it over. But please, Ms. Reeves, remember what's at stake here. This isn't just about Leo. This treatment could potentially help countless children around the world." As Clara left the study, her mind was a whirlwind of conflicting emotions. The scientist in her was fascinated by the potential of the treatment, but the caregiver in her recoiled at the risks. And beneath it all was a gnawing suspicion that she wasn't being told the whole truth. She made her way to Leo's room, finding the boy engrossed in a colorful picture book. As she sat beside him, Leo looked up with a bright smile that made her heart ache. "Clara, look at this dragon, isn't he cool?" Leo's excitement was infectious, momentarily pushing aside the weight of the decisions looming before her. "He's amazing." "Leo," she said, forcing a smile. "Hey, how would you feel about trying a new medicine soon? Something that might help you feel better?" Leo's eyes widened. "Will it make me strong like the dragon?" Clara's throat tightened. "Maybe, sweetie. We'll have to see. But it might be a little scary at first. Are you okay with that?" Leo nodded solemnly. "I'm brave, Clara. Like you and Dad say, I can do it." As Clara hugged the small boy close, she felt tears prick at the corners of her eyes. The faith Leo had in her, in the adults tasked with his care, was both beautiful and terrifying. How could she possibly make the right choice? That night, after Leo had fallen asleep, Clara found herself once again wandering the moonlit halls of the mansion. Her fingers brushed against the burner phone hidden in her pocket, the one with Dr. Chen's number programmed into it. One call and she could potentially bring the whole Pantheon project crashing down. But as she paused by Leo's door, listening to his soft breathing, she hesitated. What if the treatment worked? What if this was truly Leo's chance at a normal life? Could she live with herself if she denied him that opportunity? As the moon cast long shadows across the polished floors, Clara realized she was standing on a precipice. Whatever choice she made would have far-reaching consequences, for Leo, for the Montenegros, and for herself. The weight of the decision pressed down on her, leaving her feeling more alone than she had ever felt before. With a deep breath, Clara steeled herself. She had until morning to make her choice. To be complicit in a potentially dangerous experiment, or to blow the whistle and potentially destroy any chance of Leo's recovery. As she made her way back to her room, Clara knew that whichever path she chose, nothing would ever be the same again. As dawn broke over the Montenegro estate, Clara stood at her bedroom window, watching the first rays of sunlight paint the manicured grounds in hues of gold and pink. She hadn't slept, her mind too consumed with the impossible choice before her. The weight of Dr. Chen's business card in her pocket felt like a lead weight, a constant reminder of the power she held to potentially bring everything crashing down. A soft knock at her door startled her from her reverie. "Ms. Reeves?" Arthur's voice called from the hallway. "May I have a word?" Clara took a deep breath, steeling herself. "Come in, Mr. Montenegro." Arthur entered, looking as haggard as Clara felt. The usually impeccable billionaire seemed disheveled, his tie loosened and dark circles under his eyes betraying a sleepless night. "Have you made your decision?" he asked without preamble, his voice a mix of hope and trepidation. Clara met his gaze steadily. "Before I answer, I need to know something. Are you absolutely certain this is the best course of action for Leo? Have you truly explored every other option?" Arthur's shoulders sagged, and for a moment, the facade of the ruthless businessman crumbled away, leaving only a desperate father in its wake. "Ms. Reeves, Clara, I've spent every waking moment since Elena's death searching for a way to save our son. I've consulted specialists around the world, poured millions into research. This is our last hope." His vulnerability struck a chord in Clara's heart. She thought of Leo, of his bright smile and indomitable spirit. Could she really stand in the way of his chance at a normal life? "I'll help," she said softly, "but I have conditions." Arthur's eyes widened in surprise, then narrowed with suspicion. "What kind of conditions?" "First, I want full access to all of Leo's medical records and treatment plans. No more secrets." Clara's voice grew firmer as she spoke. "Second, at the first sign of any adverse effects, we stop the treatment immediately. No exceptions." Arthur nodded slowly. "That's reasonable. Anything else?" Clara took a deep breath. "Yes, if this treatment is successful, you agree to make it available to other children with similar conditions, not as a profit-making venture, but as a way to help those who can't afford cutting-edge treatments." For a long moment, Arthur was silent, studying Clara with an inscrutable expression. Then, to her surprise, a small smile tugged at the corners of his mouth. "You really do care about him, don't you?" "I care about all children who suffer needlessly," Clara replied. "Do we have a deal?" Arthur extended his hand. "We do, Ms. Reeves, and thank you." As they shook hands, Clara felt a mix of relief and trepidation wash over her. She had made her choice for better or worse. Now all that remained was to see it through. The next few days passed in a whirlwind of activity. A team of specialists arrived at the mansion, converting one of the guest wings into a state-of-the-art medical facility. Clara threw herself into learning everything she could about Leo's condition and the proposed treatment, poring over medical journals and grilling Dr. Patel at every opportunity. Through it all, she kept a watchful eye on Leo. The boy seemed to sense the change in the air, his usual exuberance tempered by a quiet determination. "I'm going to get better, right, Clara?" he asked one evening as she tucked him into bed. Clara's heart clenched. "We're going to do everything we can, sweetheart. You just focus on being brave, okay?" The night before the treatment was set to begin, Clara found herself once again in the mansion's library. As she ran her fingers along the spines of medical texts, a familiar voice startled her. "You've made your choice, then?" Clara whirled around to find Arthur standing in the doorway, a tumbler of amber liquid in his hand. She nodded, her throat suddenly dry. "I have." Arthur moved to stand beside her, his gaze fixed on the books before them. "Elena used to spend hours in here, you know, researching, making notes, determined to find a way to save our son." He turned to Clara, his eyes shining with unshed tears. "She would have liked you, I think." The vulnerability in his voice caught Clara off guard. For the first time, she saw past the billionaire facade to the grieving husband and desperate father beneath. "I wish I could have known her," she said softly. A comfortable silence fell between them, broken only by the ticking of the antique clock on the mantel. Finally, Arthur spoke again, his voice barely above a whisper. "Are we doing the right thing, Clara?" The use of her first name, so unusual for the formal businessman, underscored the gravity of the moment. Clara chose her words carefully. "I don't know if it's the right thing, Mr. Montenegro, but I believe it's the only thing we can do. For Leo." Arthur nodded, seeming to draw strength from her words. "For Leo," he echoed. As Clara made her way back to her room that night, her steps felt lighter, though the weight of responsibility still pressed heavily upon her shoulders. She had made her decision, cast her lot with the Montenegros and their audacious plan. Now all that remained was to see it through, come what may. The morning of the treatment dawned bright and clear, a stark contrast to the tension that permeated the mansion. Clara helped Leo dress in comfortable clothes, her heart aching at the sight of his thin frame and the trust shining in his eyes. "Are you scared, Clara?" Leo asked as she wheeled him towards the makeshift medical wing. Clara forced a smile. "A little bit, buddy. But you know what? It's okay to be scared sometimes. It means we're about to do something really important." Leo nodded solemnly. "Like the knights in my stories. They get scared too, but they still fight the dragons." "That's right," Clara said, her voice thick with emotion. "And you're the bravest knight I know." The medical wing was a hive of activity when they arrived. Dr. Patel and his team moved with practiced efficiency, preparing equipment and double-checking dosages. Arthur stood off to the side, his face a mask of barely contained anxiety. As they prepared Leo for the treatment, Clara felt a moment of panic. Was this really happening? Was she truly allowing this experimental procedure to be performed on a child she had grown to love as her own? But then Leo reached out and took her hand, his small fingers intertwining with hers. "It's okay, Clara," he said with a smile that belied his years. "We've got this." Clara squeezed his hand, drawing strength from his unwavering courage. "You're right, Leo. We've got this." As Dr. Patel began to explain the procedure, Clara's mind drifted to the burner phone hidden in her room, Dr. Chen's number still programmed into it. She had made her choice. But the weight of the road not taken still pressed upon her. Whatever happened next, she knew there was no going back. The next few hours passed in a blur of medical jargon and tense silences. Clara watched as the gene therapy was administered, her eyes fixed on the monitors displaying Leo's vital signs. Arthur paced restlessly, stopping only to whisper words of encouragement to his son, or to confer quietly with Dr. Patel. As the final dose was administered, a hush fell over the room. Dr. Patel's voice cut through the silence. "Now we wait. The next 24 hours will be critical." Clara settled into a chair beside Leo's bed, prepared for a long vigil. As she watched the steady rise and fall of his chest, she sent up a silent prayer to whatever higher power might be listening. They had taken an enormous risk, stepped off the edge of known medical science. Now all they could do was hope that the leap of faith would lead to solid ground. As the hours ticked by, Clara found herself reflecting on the journey that had brought her to this moment. She had come to the Montenegro mansion as a simple nanny, seeking only to care for a sick child. Now, she was complicit in a medical experiment that could change the course of history or end in tragedy. Through the night, Clara kept her vigil, her eyes darting between Leo's peaceful face and the monitors tracking his vital signs. Arthur joined her periodically, his usual commanding presence subdued by exhaustion and worry. As dawn broke, casting long shadows across the room, Leo stirred. His eyes fluttered open, focusing on Clara with a clarity she hadn't seen in months. "Clara?" he said, his voice stronger than it had been in weeks. "I feel different." Clara's heart leapt into her throat. She pressed the call button, summoning Dr. Patel and his team. As they swarmed around Leo, running tests and exclaiming in hushed, excited tones, Clara found herself locked in a wordless exchange with Arthur. His eyes, brimming with a potent mixture of hope and fear, asked the question neither of them dared. Voice aloud, had it worked? Had they truly found a way to save Leo? As the medical team continued their examination, Clara felt the weight of the past weeks, the agonizing decisions and sleepless nights pressing down upon her. They had taken an enormous gamble, risking everything on this experimental treatment. Now standing on the precipice of either a miraculous breakthrough or heartbreaking failure, she realized that their journey was far from over. Whatever the outcome, Clara knew that her life, and the lives of the Montenegros, would never be the same. They had crossed a threshold, ventured into uncharted territory where the lines between cutting-edge science and ethical boundaries blurred. As she watched Leo's face, alight with newfound energy, Clara silently vowed to see this through to the end, whatever the cost. The next few hours would reveal whether they had achieved the impossible or merely opened a Pandora's box of unforeseen consequences. As the tension in the room mounted, Clara steeled herself for whatever lay ahead. The die had been cast, and now they would face the results of their audacious gamble together. The days following Leo's treatment were a whirlwind of cautious optimism and rigorous testing. Dr. Patel and his team worked tirelessly, monitoring Leo's vitals and running a battery of tests to assess the efficacy of the gene therapy. Clara barely left Leo's side, her vigilance fueled by a mixture of hope and lingering anxiety. To everyone's amazement, Leo's condition showed marked improvement. His energy levels increased, his muscle tone improved, and the persistent pallor that had haunted his features for so long began to fade. Even more astonishing were the results of his genetic tests, which showed the targeted mutation beginning to correct itself. It's remarkable, Dr. Patel said one afternoon, his voice filled with awe as he reviewed the latest test results with Arthur and Clara. If these trends continue, we could be looking at a complete reversal of Leo's condition within months. Arthur's face was a study in conflicting emotions, hope warring with disbelief, joy tempered by lingering fear. And the side effects? Any signs of complications? Dr. Patel shook his head. Nothing significant so far. Of course, we'll need to continue monitoring closely, but Mr. Montenegro, I think we may have achieved something truly groundbreaking. Here, As the doctor continued to explain the intricacies of Leo's recovery, Clara found her mind drifting. She thought of Dr. Chen's warnings, of the ethical lines they had crossed in pursuing this treatment. Had the ends truly justified the means? And what would happen when news of their success inevitably leaked to the outside world? Her musings were interrupted by the sound of laughter echoing down the hallway. Leo's laughter, fuller and more carefree than she had ever heard it. The sound brought tears to her eyes, a poignant reminder of why they had taken such risks in the first place. As the weeks passed, Leo's recovery continued to astound everyone involved. He gained weight, his appetite returning with a vengeance. His physical therapy sessions, once grueling ordeals, became opportunities for him to test his growing strength and coordination. Clara watched with joy as Leo took his first unaided steps in years, his face beaming with pride and exertion. But, even as they celebrated Leo's miraculous recovery, Clara couldn't shake the feeling that they were living on borrowed time. The secret of the Pantheon project weighed heavily on her, a constant reminder of the ethical quagmire they had waded into. Her fears were realized one crisp autumn morning when Arthur burst into Leo's room, his face ashen. "We have a problem," he said, his voice tight with tension. "Someone leaked information about the treatment to the press. It's all over the news." Clara's heart sank as Arthur thrust a tablet into her hands. The screen displayed a breaking news article, its headline, screaming in bold letters, "Billionaire's secret cure, miracle or menace." As she skimmed the article, Clara felt a cold dread settling in her stomach. The piece was a mix of sensationalism and half-truths, painting Arthur as a reckless maverick willing to experiment on his own child. It raised questions about the legality of the treatment and hinted at potential cover-ups and bribery of medical officials. "What do we do?" Clara asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Arthur ran a hand through his hair, his composure cracking. "I don't know. My lawyers are working on damage control, but this could destroy everything. The company, the research, our chance to help other children like Leo." As if on cue, Leo's voice called out from his bed. "Dad? Clara, what's wrong?" They exchanged a glance, silently agreeing to shield Leo from the brewing storm for as long as possible. Clara forced a smile as she turned to the boy. "Nothing's wrong, sweetheart. Your dad just needs to take care of some business stuff. How about we read that new book you got yesterday?" As Clara settled in to read with Leo, her mind raced with possibilities. Who had leaked the information? What would the fallout be? And how could they protect Leo from the media frenzy that was sure to follow? Over the next few days, the Montenegro mansion became a fortress under siege. Reporters camped out at the gates, clamoring for statements and trying to snap photos of Leo. Arthur was in constant meetings with his legal team and PR advisors, trying to get ahead of the story. Clara did her best to maintain a sense of normalcy for Leo, but the tension in the house was palpable. She caught snippets of heated phone conversations and saw the worry lines deepening on Arthur's face with each passing day. One evening, as she was helping Leo prepare for bed, the boy surprised her with a question that cut straight to the heart of the matter. "Clara," he said, his voice small but determined, "did Dad and the doctors do something wrong to make me better?" Clara felt her heart constrict. She sat on the edge of Leo's bed, choosing her words carefully. "Your dad and the doctors did everything they could to help you, Leo. Sometimes when people try to do important things, especially new things in medicine, it can be complicated. Some people might not understand or might be scared of the changes." Leo nodded thoughtfully, like when the townspeople were scared of the wizard in my story, even though he was trying to help them. Clara smiled, marveling at the boy's perceptiveness. "That's a good comparison, Leo. The important thing is that you're feeling better, and your dad and I will always do everything we can to protect you." As she tucked Leo in, Clara's resolve strengthened. They had come too far, achieved too much, to let it all fall apart now. But she also knew that the path forward would require more than just damage control and legal maneuvering. They needed to find a way to share the breakthrough responsibly, to ensure that other children could benefit from the treatment without compromising ethics or safety. Later that night, Clara found Arthur in his study, surrounded by stacks of papers and looking more exhausted than she had ever seen him. Without a word, she poured him a glass of water and sat across from him. "We need to go public," she said quietly but with conviction. "Not just with statements and press releases, but with the full data. We need to show the world what we've achieved and offer to work with regulatory bodies to make this treatment available to others." Arthur looked up, surprise and a hint of admiration in his eyes. "That's risky. We could be opening ourselves up to even more scrutiny, possible legal action." Clara nodded. "It is risky, but it's also the right thing to do. We've proven that this treatment works. Now we have a responsibility to share it with the world, properly and ethically." For a long moment, Arthur was silent, considering her words. Then slowly he nodded. "You're right. It won't be easy, but it's what Elena would have wanted. It's what Leo deserves." As they began to outline a plan for full disclosure and collaboration with medical authorities, Clara felt a weight lifting from her shoulders. They had crossed ethical lines in their desperation to save Leo, but now they had a chance to make amends, to turn their controversial breakthrough into a force for good. The road ahead would be challenging, filled with legal hurdles, ethical debates, and intense public scrutiny. But as Clara thought of Leo, of his renewed strength and the bright future now open to him, she knew it was a fight worth having. They had changed one life. Now they had the opportunity and the responsibility to change many more. As dawn broke over the Montenegro estate, Clara looked out the window at the gathering media circus beyond the gates. The world was waiting, demanding answers and accountability. With a deep breath, she steeled herself for the battles to come. Whatever happened next, she was committed to seeing it through. For Leo, for the countless children like him, and for the future of medicine itself. The story of the Pantheon Project was far from over. In many ways, it was just beginning. The following weeks were a maelstrom of activity as the Montenegro household prepared to face the world. Arthur, with Clara's unwavering support, had decided to take a bold approach, full transparency and cooperation with medical authorities. The first step was a press conference held on the grounds of the Montenegro estate. As cameras flashed and reporters jostled for position, Arthur stood at the podium, his face a mask of calm determination. Clara watched from the sidelines, her heart racing as he began to speak. "Ladies and gentlemen," Arthur said, his voice steady, "I stand before you today not as a businessman but as a father who, like countless others, was faced with the unthinkable, watching his child suffer from a debilitating genetic condition with no cure in sight." He went on to explain the origins of the Pantheon Project, careful to emphasize Elena's foundational work and the years of research that had preceded Leo's treatment. As he delved into the technical aspects of the gene therapy, Clara marveled at the transformation of the once ruthless tycoon. Here was a man laid bare, driven not by profit or power, but by love for his son and a genuine desire to help others. "We recognize that in our haste to save Leo, we may have overstepped ethical boundaries," Arthur continued, his voice tinged with regret. "For that, we are prepared to face any consequences. But we also believe that the breakthrough we've achieved is too important to keep hidden. That's why we're pledging full cooperation with medical authorities and offering to share our research with reputable institutions around the world." The press conference ended with a bombshell announcement. Arthur was stepping down as CEO of Montenegro Industries to focus on establishing a non-profit foundation dedicated to making the gene therapy accessible to children in need, regardless of their ability to pay. As the reporters erupted into a frenzy of questions, Clara felt a tap on her shoulder. She turned to find Dr. Chen standing behind her, a mix of emotions playing across her face. "You did the right thing," the doctor said softly. "It won't be easy, but this could change everything." Clara nodded, feeling a wave of relief wash over her. "Thank you for understanding, and for for giving us a chance to make this right." Dr. Chen's expression softened. "Sometimes the greatest breakthroughs come from those willing to take risks. Just promise me you'll keep a close eye on Leo. We're in uncharted territory here." As the doctor melted back into the crowd, Clara's attention was drawn to a commotion near the house. Leo, unable to contain his curiosity any longer, had wheeled himself onto the porch to watch the proceedings. As cameras swiveled to capture images of the boy at the heart of the controversy, Clara rushed to his side. "It's okay," Leo said, surprising her with his composure. "I want them to see me, to see that I'm getting better." Clara knelt beside his wheelchair, her eyes searching his face. "Are you sure, sweetheart? It's okay if you're not ready for all this attention." Leo's jaw set in a determined line that reminded her so much of his father. "I'm sure. If it helps other kids like me, then I want to be brave." With a nod, Clara stood and wheeled Leo closer to the gathered press. Arthur, seeing them approach, quickly wrapped up his statement and moved to join them. As flashbulbs popped and reporters called out questions, the three of them stood united, a tableau of hope and redemption in the face of adversity. The days that followed were a whirlwind of interviews, meetings with medical ethics boards, and intense scrutiny from every corner of the scientific community. Clara found herself thrust into the role of spokesperson, her nursing background and intimate knowledge of Leo's case making her an invaluable asset in explaining the treatment to the public. Through it all, Leo continued to improve. His progress became a beacon of hope, not just for his family but for countless others watching from around the world. Letters and emails poured in from parents of children with similar conditions, all desperate for a chance at the miracle Leo had received. But with hope came new challenges. The Montenegro Foundation, hastily established to oversee the distribution of the treatment, was overwhelmed with applications. Ethical questions abounded. How to decide who received the limited doses available? How to ensure that ability to pay didn't determine access to the therapy? Clara found herself at the center of these debates, her compassion for the children, and families reaching out to them warring with the practical limitations they faced. Late one night, as she pored over yet another stack of applications, she felt the weight of responsibility pressing down on her. A soft knock at the door pulled her from her reverie. Arthur entered, carrying 2 steaming mugs of coffee. "I thought you could use this," he said, setting one mug in front of her. Clara smiled gratefully, wrapping her hands around the warm ceramic. "Thank you. I didn't realize how late it had gotten." Arthur settled into a chair across from her, his eyes scanning the piles of paperwork. "How are we doing?" Clara sighed, running a hand through her hair. "It's overwhelming. Every application, every letter, and they're all so deserving. How do we choose?" Arthur nodded solemnly. "I've been grappling with the same question. We have the power to change lives, but we can't help everyone. At least not yet." They sat in companionable silence for a moment, each lost in thought. Clara's mind drifted to Leo, peacefully asleep down the hall, blissfully unaware of the weight his miracle cure now carried. "You know," Arthur said softly, breaking the silence, "Elena used to say that the hardest part of being a doctor wasn't the long hours or the difficult cases. It was knowing that sometimes, no matter how hard you tried, you couldn't save everyone." Clara met his gaze, seeing the mix of grief and determination in his eyes. How do we reconcile that, knowing we have the ability to help, but being limited in how many we can reach? Arthur leaned forward, his voice low but intense. "We do what we can, with what we have, where we are. We set up fair protocols. We work tirelessly to increase production and refine the treatment, and we never ever forget the faces behind these applications." Clara nodded, feeling a renewed sense of purpose. "You're right. We can't help everyone immediately, but we can make sure that every child we do help becomes a stepping stone towards helping more." As they continued to discuss strategies for moving forward, Clara felt a shift in her relationship with Arthur. They were no longer simply employer and employee, or even co-conspirators in a medical breakthrough. They had become partners in a mission larger than themselves, bound by their shared commitment to Leo and to the countless other children waiting for their chance at a miracle. The clock on the wall ticked steadily towards midnight, but neither Clara nor Arthur made a move to leave. There was work to be done, lives to be changed. And though the path ahead was fraught with challenges, they would face them together, for Leo, for Elena's memory, and for the future they now had the power to shape. As the first hints of dawn began to lighten the sky outside, Clara realized that their journey was far from over. In many ways, it was just beginning. The Pantheon project had started as a desperate gamble to save one child, but it had grown into something far greater, a beacon of hope for families around the world, and a testament to the power of love, science, and unwavering determination. Whatever challenges lay ahead, Clara knew they would face them head-on, guided by the light of the lives they had already changed and the countless more they hoped to touch. The road would be long and often difficult, but as she looked at Arthur's determined face and thought of Leo's bright smile, she knew that every step would be worth it. And so as a new day dawned, Clara Montenegro, for she had truly become part of this family now, set aside her coffee mug and reached for another application. There was work to be done, hope to be given, and lives to be transformed. The Pantheon project's true legacy was just beginning to unfold.